Now I've got a fun one for you today. Up there with the elk hair caddis, it's probably in the top 2 of the dry flies that I use most often. And I'm talking about parachute Adams. Now I won't go into the history of the Adams in this video. I've talked about it before and it's pretty well documented out there. But what you may not know is who came up with the parachute style of tying mayflies. And that is primarily credited to a Scottish tyer named Helen Todd. In the early 1930s, she was tying for Alexander Martin, a fishing company in Scotland. And a guy named William Bush is credited with coming up with it here in the States roughly about the same time. And he did apply for and get a patent on a hook that he came up with just had a metal post on the top. But his patent came through a couple years after the one Alexander Martin submitted. So he's not always been given the same amount of credit as Helen Todd has been. But either way, while this fly might be just a little bit harder to tie than the standard style, it's really a fish catcher. So why are they so effective? Well, most people think it's because the flies don't ride above the surface film. With the hackle the way it is, spread out, kind of parallel to the water, the body of the fly will actually sit in the surface film, and it's the hackle that keeps it floating. So the fish just see a lot more of the fly. And with the post sticking up, it does help it to ride upright, and it certainly helps us fishermen to see it better. And back in the old days, most of the posts were created with something natural, like a white calftail, but a lot of them nowadays, the posts are made out of something synthetic, either a nylon, antron, or Z-line, and Hairline even makes something called a para-post. And I do use that for most of the parachute flies that I tie, but today I'm going to tie it with, going old school, I'm going to use white calftail for the post. And the reason really is, if you can do it with white calftail, you can certainly do it with a synthetic. And if you're tying them down to a 18 or 20, you kind of have to use a synthetic. You just can't get that much calftail on a hook that small. So this style of dry fly, you can pretty much tie any mayfly with it. Just change the color of the tail, the body, and the hackle. Make it anything you want. Okay, one more thing. Since a lot of y'all keep asking me for more fishing footage, stick around after the tie and you'll see me using this on the gunpowder last night. But heads up though, no big fish in this one, just a minute and 47 seconds of me catching a couple of dinkers. But if you are curious of what the Gunpowder River looks like, you can see a little stretch of it here. Okay, let's tie this parachute Adams. So there's one in the vise, a classic parachute Adams, and I'm going with the old school style. That's a calftail post. You certainly don't have to do that. And you know, one thing about a calftail post, you have to get the length right. See this one's short, and the one that's in there is long. And that's kind of a judgment call of how you want to do it. But if you tie it with a synthetic, you're going to be trimming it anyway, so it's much easier to get to the right height. So if we are using calftail, you're going to have to be just a little careful. And I'm going with a size 14. That's 14 standard length dry fly hook. And I will put down some gray thread. Just get it caught into the start of the bend. And the first thing we're going to catch in, some brown hackle fibers for the tail here, and about a body length. And this is from the same feather that I'm going to be using for the hackle. So let's get that caught in. All right, I think that is going to work right there. Now do the same thing with some grizzly hackle. And this is probably 10 or so fibers. So let's just catch them in about the same length right here. Okay, I think that's going to be fine. One more wrap back, and then a few more securing it. And I'm going to need to snip this up here because I got a little bit of that stuff that's stuck on it from pulling it off the stem. So let's bury this and then leave our thread about a third of the way back. And since I'm going old school with the calftail post, I am going to try to put it in my stacker. So I've got this, let's see, and you have to give it some good wax. Let's see if that stacked okay right there. I think it did, and this is going to be a pretty thick tuft, but it won't be as thick as you necessarily think. So that right there, and when I'm doing these, if I'm going to err to any side, I err to the side of making it just a little bit long. So this first wrap right here is going to be kind of loose. Second wrap still kind of loose, and now I can get tighter as I go back. And I did those loose wraps because I don't really want it to be spinning around up front. Okay, now let's just snip this in the back, and if we can snip it at an angle, it will help us with the taper of the body. So let's try to lift all this up, get all of them without getting the tail. Okay, and then maybe just a little bit of an angle right there. And if you get that right, it will help you get a smoother taper going back. So let's just spin a few thread wraps right there and then take the thread right up behind them. And then grab all of these and let's post it up. I'm going to try to get it 90 degrees going up. It's going to take several wraps. This is only a 70 denier thread here. Okay, that's probably going to work right there, but we're going to have to put some wraps around it to bunch them together. So this can be a little bit tricky. Put your thread, get it right up under it, and you have to grab it. And when you grab it, you can pull the thread kind of tight, but then when you let go, you've got to ease up on your thread. Now I can pull it tighter. Now ease up on it. And right now, I'm just getting, going up a little bit, but let's take it back down. And if you need to put a few more wraps right in front to post it up, you can still do that. I think we're fine. So let's go ahead and catch in our hackle. So take a brown and a grizzly, just dry fly hackle here. And I did measure this in my hackle gauge. So I'm going to put a wrap around it right there. I'm going to pull it up a little bit because I want some of that bare stem going up. And now, maybe not that much. So let's try that again. Okay, that right there might work. And now I'm going to take these wraps around it and go up. And again, you can't put them too tight unless you have a hold of this post and the feathers. So what we're doing right here is creating a base that we're going to wrap this hackle down on. So when you got it high enough you think it's going to work, let's take it back down here and then catch in these right here. And what, I saw Barry or Clark do, he folded those back and then caught them in going back, which you can certainly do that. Or you can just kind of snip them off. So I'm not going to fold them all the way back. I'm going to snip them off right there just to keep from, building up too much bulk on my body here. So just take a few wraps, smooth this area out. Now take your thread to the back and we're going to dub it. So I'm going to put a little wax on. And I'm going to use Adam's Gray. This is actually a super fine. I guess if I was keeping this totally original, I would have put muskrat on here. But keep this noodle pretty thin because for the most part, we've already built the bulk of our underbody right there with that thread and those, hackle feathers. So maybe a 3-inch noodle. I'm going to put a couple of wraps on the back. And now when I've got the first wrap laying dubbing, I can tighten this up just a little bit more and take a smooth layer all the way up and then around the front for the thorax. Now I could put a small amount of dubbing right up there in the front of that post, but I really didn't leave myself enough room, and to do that would probably crowd my eye too much. So I'm going to have to just kind of skip that. So go ahead and snip your thread after you do a whip finish right there, and we're going to spin this around. I think this is the easiest way to do this part right here. So let's get that in there. Now we can wrap our hackle. Well, not yet. We wouldn't have anything to catch it down with. So we need to put some thread wraps right here. Not real tight just yet, but enough to really hold that in. Snip off the tag end, and now we're ready to wrap this hackle. And I have found it's just a little bit easier to wrap them one at a time, but when you do this, keep in mind we're going to have to wrap this grizzly through this brown, so maybe leave a little bit of space in between each one. And let's get about 3 wraps each. So let's go ahead and catch this one off with a couple of wraps. Now we're going to wrap this grizzly, and this one I'm going to have to zigzag through just a little bit. Just kind of take your time right here. That's 2, and here's our 3rd wrap. So let's go ahead and catch this one off with 2 wraps. Again, try to zigzag it through there. Let's go ahead with an extra wrap. Now we could go ahead and snip these off, but I've learned from experience that to be careful doing that, because if you don't get the whip finish in just right, one of those hackle feathers could slip out after you've trimmed it, and then you've just kind of got to start over this part. So I'm going to go ahead and just whip finish before I've snipped those excess hackle tips. Now I can snip my thread and this hackle. Okay, let's turn it around in here and see if we have any cleanup. Yeah, I might have a little bit. I've got some of these fibers coming down right there. I should probably trim those, but as long as you can get your tippet up through there, you're probably good to go. So yeah, a little bit of cleanup in those fibers right there, and the smallest drop of head cement on those thread wraps in that first whip finish, and I think we're good to go. So that's it, everybody. I appreciate you watching. Stick around a couple of minutes if you want to see me using this thing out on the gunpowder. Hello, everybody. I'm here on the gunpowder. I am parked at York Road. So I'm gonna start fishing this area right behind me. I'm not sure if you can tell, but it's pretty smooth water, semi-deep, pretty slow moving. So it might be tough fishing, but I did see a fish or 2 rise. Maybe the sulfurs are starting to come off, and maybe we'll have some action on the surface. Let's give it a shot. Oh, there's a little guy. Little guy, he came up, and it was I was a delayed hook set on my part. Had a lot of line out and slow to set it. Let's hope he's okay. He's got a good bend in this little fiberglass rod, but he's not a big fish. But let's get him in the net just to take it easy on him. See that? That's your standard gunpowder brown, about 9 inches right there, maybe 8. Let's get this hook out of him. Get back in there, buddy. All right, he's off there. Neat little fish, he was fun. There's a little guy. See that? I didn't even see that log over there where he was, but he came up for it. Come on there, buddy. There we go, he's off.